In this lecture, we will talk about what I called here 3 strategies for happiness and success. These 3 are mindfulness, self-esteem, and strengths. Mindfulness rests on the insight that we only have the present moment to live in. We will look at how meditation is basically just a workout for the brain. And then we will learn about other ways to be more aware and more mindful about what's going on in our lives. The second of these strategies is self-esteem. And self-esteem is the judgment that we place upon ourselves, and it affects almost every aspect of our lives. We'll understand what it means to have high self-esteem and how we can practice it based on the 6 pillars or practices of high self-esteem. And the third class is going to look at strengths, because understanding what we're good at can transform our lives. I will argue that we have an inherent bias towards looking at our weaknesses, and we easily overlook our strengths. So then in more particular, we will look at how character strengths can be identified and used to use their benefits in our lives. How much attention do you pay to the present moment, this very moment in time? If you take a second to notice how much attention you pay or we pay to anything, you will quickly notice that the mind is all over the place. It never sits still. We spend huge amounts of time planning and worrying about the future, and we spend also huge amounts of time thinking about the past, about what happened yesterday and who said what to you, and there's just a plethora of different things that our mind is constantly worrying about. And the present moment gets completely squeezed out among all these occupations, all these things that are going on in our mind. But the present moment at the same time is the only moment that we are ever alive in. The only moment we can ever enjoy something. The only moment that we can experience. And this is what mindfulness is about. The definition of mindfulness is what Jon Kabat-Zinn calls paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. Starting from this definition, and in order to understand mindfulness, we'll now first take a look at the opposite of mindfulness. Because we humans have a usual tendency to sleepwalk through our lives. This mode is what could be described as autopilot. We are very rarely aware of the present moment. We are most of the time on something like an autopilot. Let me give you an example so you get a better understanding of what I mean. You might be familiar with this situation. You drive home from work and you want to stop at the supermarket. But actually, you find yourself with the key in the door before you realize that you were on autopilot all the way home. You were lost in thoughts, maybe thinking about what had happened at work or what will have to be done at home. And the present experience of driving, to the supermarket for that matter, got completely squeezed out, was lost among all the thoughts that you had about work and home or any other scenarios that constantly play out in our minds. That's what's being on autopilot, and that's what's the exact opposite of mindfulness. Let's take a time out together here. Stop the video and take a few minutes to become aware of your current experience, right here and right now. Feel the sense of your body, your feet in contact with the floor, your buttocks on the chair if you're sitting. Feel your head and your shoulders. And maybe, can you feel the movement of your breath somewhere in your body? As I said, stop the video here and pay attention just for a minute or two. This was a first glimpse into mindfulness, a first glimpse into what I mean if I talk about paying attention to the present moment on purpose and without judging it. Jon Kabat-Zinn, the researcher responsible for bringing mindfulness into our field, emphasizes that mindfulness is not simply a technique, but it's a way of being, a way of living that means living in this very moment. But for our purpose, we can look at it also as a skill, because that's what it also is, a skill, and a skill that can be developed. And one of the main tools for developing mindfulness is mindfulness meditation. So in the next part of the class, we'll look at the evidence, the research that's there, that tells us how beneficial mindfulness can be if we apply it to our lives. Research into mindfulness has grown at a tremendous pace. It is proven to be effective from medicine and psychology to education, business and leadership, and in a wide area of other fields, like helping people stop smoking and overcome depression. I said before that the main tool for developing mindfulness is mindfulness meditation. And brain research is producing hard evidence that meditation practice can literally change the way our brain works. Early studies looking at mindfulness have examined Buddhist monks. Those monks are people who practice mindfulness every day from quite early on. And brain scientists found that long-time practitioners showed brain activation on a scale that had never been seen before. Those Buddhist monks were able to generate high amounts of so-called gamma waves in our brain. These gamma waves are important for remembering and for learning. What's more, brain areas that are responsible for our happiness and positive emotions have been found to be much larger than usual. That's when psychologists and neuroscience began to understand that the brain is capable of being trained and physically modified in ways few people can imagine. Remember how neuroscientists used to believe the opposite? Before neuroplasticity was discovered, we thought that connections among brain nerve cells were fixed early in life and did not change throughout the rest of it. But that assumption was proven wrong. Nowadays, we have very convincing evidence that meditation practice can have effects on our brain the same way golf and tennis practice affects our mind and our body. So this may be great for Buddhist monks, but what about normal people? What's in it for us who cannot spend hours meditating every day? There's good news too. And to prove this, we turn to a study that was eye-opening on several levels. Two of the pioneers in the field, their names are Richard Davidson and Jon Kabat-Zinn, went to a big biotechnological company and trained the employees there to practice mindfulness meditation for 8 weeks. And the impact was impressive. First, it showed that just 8 weeks of mindfulness training can significantly decrease people's stress. This finding was important, but it was not all that much surprising, because after all, they called their program mindfulness-based stress reduction. But then, the researchers also took a look at the meditators' brains. Those people who had just been meditating for 8 weeks now had significantly more brain activity in the areas associated with positive emotions. Only 8 weeks. And the most fascinating finding had to do with their immune function. At the end of the 8-week study, all the participants, that means the meditators and the people who have been put on a wait list, the so-called control group, were given flu shots. And what the two researchers found then was that those people who had been meditating for 8 weeks produced significantly more antibodies to the influenza vaccine. That means that after just 8 weeks of mindfulness meditation, the meditators were clearly happier and more resistant to illnesses. That's amazing, only 8 weeks. And in fact, even newer research shows that people meditating for only 3 weeks, 20 minutes per day, already demonstrated some changes in their brains. For researchers, these outcomes were mind-blowing because even though neuroplasticity was already discovered, nobody thought that we are such in control of the way our brain is working. One of the leading neuroscientists in the world, Professor Richard Davidson, who works very closely with the Dalai Lama, phrased it this way. This positive state is a skill that can be trained. Our findings clearly indicate that meditation can change the function of the brain in an enduring way. And somebody who should really know it phrased it like this. Meditating is like lifting weights or exercising for the mind. Anyone can be happy by simply training their brain. The person who said this was Matthieu Ricard, and he is often labeled as the happiest man alive. These two studies that I shared with you and the recent quotes were just a snapshot of some of the research in the last 20 years. Of course, there are hundreds of studies more. What's so remarkable is that mindfulness helps improve everything from attention and brain function to immunity and even skin disease. Yes, studies have even shown that meditation significantly accelerated the healing process of psoriasis, a skin condition. And if you want to get a simple but very thorough explanation of what is really going on in the brain, here is a great explanation of Daniel Siegel. He's the author of the book Mindsight and the founder of the discipline Interpersonal Neurobiology. And it's really interesting what he has to say. So I attached a link in the resources to a talk from him. It's about 20 minutes. So if you're interested in that, check it out. It's really informative. He explains how the brain works and how mindfulness influences the brain. And as I just said, he also has a wonderful book called Mindsight that I recommend if you want to know more. Now we look at applying mindfulness to our lives. The exercises and practices here are meant to get you started. They are great for beginners, for getting you started to meditate. Advanced meditators may find that the next steps are missing. That's because this is not meant to be a full-fledged mindfulness course. The first exercise that we will start together is called recognizing the unsettled mind. Again, mindfulness is the deliberate intention to observe the activity of our mind in a non-judgmental way, to step back and notice whatever arises in our mind without reacting to it. The starting point for mindfulness is simply noticing what is happening in our minds right now. Let's begin by doing a simple exercise. Sit comfortably with your back straight. For a beginner, a straight back chair is probably best. Once you're sitting comfortably, simply relax and experience being where you are. Feel the pressure of your body resting on the seat and on the ground. Become aware of the space around you. Notice how you naturally become aware of sights, sounds, and other sensory stimuli. Perhaps a certain smell, or maybe a breeze brushing your skin. So this practice is very simple. Just allow yourself to be present, experiencing whatever happens. When you sit and do nothing, decide to sit and do nothing. Let your mind rest in the present moment and simply be aware of where you are right now. You might want to stop here for a minute to do this exercise on your own. In a surprisingly short time, you may find that you're thinking about something, even though you had decided to do nothing other than notice what occurs in your senses in this moment. When you realize you are thinking, simply bring back your attention. Bring it back to the here and now, doing nothing, just observing. Rest assured, you will continue to drift off into random thoughts, worries, daydreams, or ruminations. That's normal. Every time that happens, gently bring back your attention to the here and now, doing nothing. Now that you're done with this exercise, reflect on it. You sat down, relaxed, and decided not to do anything, not to chase your thoughts, and not to get lost in imagination. But despite this decision, you probably found yourself thinking about something. What does this tell you? What does this tell us? It seems that our mind automatically pulls us away from the present moment into thinking. This habit is strong and has the power to override our decision to make progress. This is what Paul Gilbert calls the unsettled mind. And we all have it. Meditation and mindfulness is a way of settling our mind more and of training our mind to be able to live this present moment. Another way to practice mindfulness is mindful breathing. This is the very basic mindfulness meditation exercise that beginners usually start with. The practice looks something like this. You begin by sitting comfortably in a position that enables you to be both alert and relaxed. Start by taking 3 slow deep breaths, and then resume breathing naturally and bring a gentle attention to your breath and the movement of your breath. Tune in to the physical sensation of breathing, not thinking about the breath, but being with it, becoming aware of the in-breath and the out-breath. Again, you will find that your mind wanders off from the breath. This is perfectly normal and not a problem. The mind naturally wanders. Just acknowledge the sensation, thought, or sound, experience it, and very gently let it go. And then bring your attention, again very gently, back to your breathing. You have detailed instructions in the resources. You can do this for any length of time. Start off doing it for just a few minutes, maybe only 2 or 3. When it comes to posture, you can really practice in any posture that you want. This can be sitting, lying down, or even standing or walking on your feet if that feels right for you. But remember that the best meditation posture allows you to be relaxed and alert at the same time. That's the most important thing. You have to be able to be relaxed and alert at the same time. For many people, this means that you have to keep your back straight. Close your eyes or keep them halfway open, whatever feels most appropriate to you. In the resources, you will also find a link to a guided meditation, a 20-minute guided meditation by Jon Kabat-Zinn. He was the researcher responsible for bringing mindfulness into the scientific realm. And it's a very good one, but it's 20 minutes, so you might want to start off doing this very easy practice for a few minutes, and then you will see where it leads you. The third mindfulness exercise that I want to present you is mindful eating. It's a very simple exercise that involves food, often a raisin, or maybe if you don't like raisins, a piece of chocolate, or something like that. It involves various steps, and they're also, again, outlined in the additional resources. You can do this exercise for 5 to 10 minutes or even longer if you want. Just try it out and see how it feels for you. In this last part of this class, we want to take a closer look on the challenges that arise when we're trying to establish a mindfulness practice. You may want to practice mindfulness for a few days or a week or 2 before you go through this class. It's up to you. When we set up a mindfulness practice, it helps us to think of it as a mental workout, because that's what it is. Meditation is a mental workout. We cannot stop our mind going off on thoughts that we didn't choose. But when we notice it has gone and deliberately guide it back, that's like exercising a mental muscle. So if your mind wanders like 20 times in the space of 1 minute, then you guide it back 20 times and you have done 20 units of exercise. It's like 20 sit-ups for the mind. So you do not need to worry if your mind wanders many times. Every time you guide it back, you enhance your skill of mindfulness. Also, don't be discouraged by the challenges you face. No matter how difficult your experiences, there are ways to work with them and learn with them. It is incredibly common for people to think that they are bad meditators or that everyone else can do it except them. However, almost everybody faces challenges, and that is why in this class we talk about a list of common mistakes, of common obstacles, and how we can overcome them. Of course, this list is not exhaustive, but it captures many of the common problems. The first of the challenges is restlessness. It's incredibly common to feel restlessness when we start to meditate. We start feeling the need to move. We want to get up and just do something different. Just try to be with this restless feeling without acting on it. Try to experience these feelings and thoughts as what they are, fabrications of the mind. And then settle down a little bit more. Try to feel the present moment a little bit more and try to feel your breath a little bit more. Another interesting one is sleepiness. We often find that meditating reminds us of how sleepy we actually are. If you find yourself drifting into sleep, try if you can be non-judgmental about this too. If it happens too frequently, try to adjust your posture. Try to be in a more upright position, or maybe change the time of your meditation practice. Thirdly, there's boredom. We are so caught up in our usual lives that are full of distractions that it can be hard to take all the distractions away and really be in the present moment. We start to lose interest in just sitting there and doing nothing. So here's your chance to bring curiosity to something that we take so much for granted, that we ignore most of our lives, even though it is the very basis of our lives. Our breath and our breathing. And every breath is different. So try to acknowledge this and bring more curiosity to what's happening in your body, in your mind, if you meditate. Maybe you manage to even bring curiosity to your feelings of boredom and say, that's interesting. So that's the way I feel and think about it. The fourth one is the question, am I doing it wrong? Or what am I doing here? Or when will I finally see results? See if you can let go of these fabrications of your mind and be non-judgmental about your practice. Because this is what mindfulness is. Paying attention on purpose in the present moment and in a non-judgmental way. See if you can drop this commenting voice that's constantly judging us. And see if you can move beyond the relentless judging of good and bad and useful and useless. If you have decided to give mindfulness a try, don't be discouraged and acknowledge that it is not a quick fix. It takes time. If you are in doubt, keep in mind that there is a huge amount of research demonstrating its effectiveness. The fifth one is laziness. It's easy to get too lazy to really keep up the practice. It's easy to say, I will watch TV instead. That's so much easier, so much more comfortable to do. But remember the class on making change happen. You already know how to build a habit. You already know what steps to take to make this change and set up this habit in your life. And if you decide to give mindfulness a try, definitely try to make it a habit. Just a few minutes a day and you will see where it goes. Rounding up this lecture, I want to stress again that the present moment is the only moment that we are ever alive in. And let's give it the attention it deserves. Let me start this lecture with a quote. a quote from Nathaniel Branden, who says that, "Apart from disturbance, whose roots are biological, I cannot think of a single psychological problem, from anxiety and depression to underachievement at school or at work, to fear of intimacy, happiness or success, to alcohol or drug abuse, to spouse battering or child molestation, to codependency and sexual disorders, to passivity and chronic aimlessness, to suicide and crimes of violence, that is not traceable, at least in part, to the problem of deficient self-esteem. Of all the judgments we pass in our life, none is as important as the one we pass on ourselves." The person who said this was Nathaniel Branden, often called the father of the self-esteem movement, and probably the first to promote a holistic understanding of self-esteem. And the definition of self-esteem that he provides is self-esteem as an integrated sum of self-confidence and self-respect. It is the conviction that one is competent to live and worthy of living. The first part of self-esteem is self-confidence. This is a feeling of competence, a feeling that we are able to face the challenges of life. And the second component is self-respect. Self-respect means we like ourselves. We feel worthy of happiness. Or yet another way to say it is feeling competent means trusting in our own abilities, to think on our own, to make our own decisions, to learn and to cope with life. Not seeing ourselves as a victim of circumstances or the victim of the action of others. Feeling worthy means being comfortable in asserting one's thoughts, wants and needs in an appropriate manner. And the feeling that being happy and fulfilled are something that's appropriate to us. So on the other hand, if you have low self-esteem, then you feel inappropriate to life, somehow wrong as a person. People with high levels of self-esteem are more resilient. That means they bounce back more easily if they face troubles, if something bad happens to them. Also, their romantic relationships and also their relationships to their family and friends are more fulfilled because they are able to express themselves more openly. Also, people are more successful because they have high self-esteem. Beliefs are self-fulfilling prophecies. We talked about this in an earlier lecture, and it is true here as well. If I believe that I am worthy and competent, if I believe in myself, then I'm much more likely to succeed. And last but not least, people with high self-esteem are also happier. But let me now address some of the common misconceptions about self-esteem. Self-esteem, first of all, is a fundamental human need. Self-esteem affects every area in our life. When we are alone, when we are with others, whether we are at home or at work, we are constantly evaluating ourselves. Researchers call self-esteem the immune system of consciousness. Researchers call self-esteem the immune system of consciousness. A healthy immune system doesn't guarantee that you'll never become ill, but it does reduce your susceptibility to illness, and it can help you recover faster if you do get sick. The same is true psychologically. People with strong self-esteem are more resilient in face of life's difficulties. It is impossible to have too much self-esteem. People who are arrogant actually show a lack of self-esteem. Those who are truly comfortable with themselves and their achievements take pleasure in being who they are. They don't need to tell the world about it. Secondly, it's not about being perfect. Perfection is an ideal no one can consistently hold up to, and failure is an important part of learning. Remember the growth mindset? We have to be willing to fail. We have to be willing to make mistakes in order to be the best we can. Tal Ben-Shahar, the professor teaching positive psychology at Harvard University, calls this giving yourself the permission to be human, because humans do fail. So we have to give ourselves the permission to do so and not be perfect. Thirdly, self-esteem is about what you think of yourself. Becoming successful, powerful, or well-liked does not automatically translate into good self-esteem. In fact, talented and powerful people who doubt their own core values are usually unable to find joy in their achievements. So keep in mind, self-esteem has only to do with what I think of myself, not what anybody else thinks of me. And lastly, self-esteem has to be grounded in reality. Just like optimism must be grounded in reality, self-esteem must be too. In fact, Nathaniel Branden says, self-esteem is the reputation we acquire with ourselves. And we build up this reputation with our actions. And in the following part of the class, we'll explore which actions to take to build up our self-esteem. Many research findings suggest that the results of self-esteem enhancement programs are very weak. Much of the evidence points to the fact that many claims are extravagant and unfounded, especially in popular culture. But why are all these self-esteem programs so ineffective? The main reason is that what determines your level of self-esteem is what you do. Of course, it's nice to read and hear inspiring words and get an intellectual understanding of something. But it's what we do that leads to our self-esteem, not what we hear or know. Also, when we talked about change, we talked about the importance of building habits, and that this is the most effective approach to change. And once we introduce behavioral change, our new behavior in turn changes our attitudes. You remember self-perception theory. If you want to improve in a specific area of life, the most effective way is to change our behavior, because we learn about ourselves by observing our behavior. In order to understand how exactly we can do that, we will take a look at the framework that Nathaniel Branden sets up. He talks about the 6 pillars that make up self-esteem, 6 practices that are important for the cultivation of self-esteem. Here they are. The first of those practices, or pillars, is called living consciously. Living consciously, in essence, means being mindful. It's what we just talked about before. Living consciously is living in a mindful manner and paying attention to what we think and what we do. The second of those pillars is self-acceptance. I also mentioned this before. Self-accepting is about being willing to experience whatever we truly think, feel and do, even if we don't like it. Facing our mistakes and learning from them, and giving ourselves the permission to be human. Self-responsibility is the third pillar of self-esteem. It's an active orientation to life, rather than a passive, victim-like orientation. Being self-responsibly means that we understand that we are responsible for our choices and our actions at every level, and that the achievement of our goals, happiness and values is also within our responsibility. Here's an example. In personal relationships, people who are most fulfilled go beyond just saying, I want this and that. They ask, what am I willing to do to get what I want? They pay attention to the quality of the time they spend with their friends and family, children and spouses. They notice whether or not communication is clear, and they acknowledge their own feelings, are sensitive to the feelings of others, and face conflicts and deal with them. Viktor Frankl, a Jewish psychologist who survived the Holocaust, said this. He said that ultimately, man should not ask what the meaning of his life is, but rather must recognize that it is he who is asked. In a word, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life, he can only respond by being responsible. Another example for acting self-responsibly would be in business. People who succeed don't limit themselves to doing only the tasks to which they are assigned. They're constantly looking for ways to contribute outside their current job descriptions. The fourth of the pillars is self-assertiveness. And this simply means to be able to say no when it's appropriate and to say yes when this is appropriate. Self-assertiveness is about standing up for what we believe in. Living purposefully means to have clear goals, to have a purpose in what we are doing. We also talked about purpose in the Change lecture, and I refer you to the legacy exercise. Maybe revisit it to really get an understanding of what's my purpose in life, what am I here for, why am I doing the things that I'm doing. And last but not least, integrity. That's the sixth pillar of self-esteem. Integrity means that there is a match between what we say and what we do. It also means that our behavior matches our beliefs and our convictions. When we show integrity, we act in congruence with what we believe is right. Here's an example. You commit and write down to work out twice a week. And then you go and actually start working out twice a week because you committed to it. This is integrity. When I keep my word and follow up on what I say, that's when I communicate to myself, my words matter, I matter. On the other hand, when I communicate something, commit to doing something and don't follow up on what I said, then I'm essentially saying to myself, what I say is not important. It doesn't matter. I do not matter. On the other hand, when I keep my word and I follow up on what I say, that's when I communicate to myself, my words matter. I matter. The principal exercise to build self-esteem, it is also developed by Nathaniel Branden, is what is called sentence stems completion exercise. The exercise consists of sentence stems, such as, if I live more self-assertively today, ... and requires us to create 5 to 10 endings to this sentence. This simple exercise rests on the insight that we all have more knowledge than what is consciously available to us. It's a tool to access and activate those hidden inner resources. And this in turn helps us change our behavior. You will find a detailed outline in the additional resources. Here's the quick roundup of this lecture. Self-esteem is a deep conviction that we have a right to be happy and that we are competent in thinking, learning, and making appropriate decisions. It has to be grounded in reality and doesn't rely on comparison to others. It simply is the joy in one's own being. Once upon a time, there was a rabbit who went to animal school. He did great at running and great at jumping, but climbing wasn't that good. Flying wasn't even a possibility, and swimming not only terrified and nearly drowned him, but it humiliated him in front of all the other animals. So he went home, hoping his parents would understand and help. But they said he had to get a diploma. So the next day he went to talk to the guidance counselor. The counselor diagnosed that he didn't like school because he wasn't doing well in swimming. And so she arranged for him not to go to running anymore. After all, he was doing fine there. Instead, he had to take 2 periods of swimming. This short story illustrates a point. We are too focused on weaknesses. Time and energy spent trying to improve our weaknesses could far more productively be focused on maximizing a strength. We should just manage weaknesses, not try to overcome them, because it is our strengths through which we can best contribute to the world, and that will bring us our greatest satisfaction. So one of the most important contributions of positive psychology is a focus on our strengths. Peter Drucker, one of the most famous managers and leaders of the 20th century, said a person can perform only from strength. One cannot build performance on weakness, let alone something one cannot do at all. The strengths approach focuses on what is right, on what is working, and on what is strong. Strengths are part of our basic human nature. Everybody has strengths. Our areas of greatest potential are the areas of our greatest strengths. Fixing weaknesses alone is not enough. We also have to cultivate our strengths. And last but not least, using a strength is the smallest thing we can do to make the biggest difference. When we are using our strengths, we are more authentic and energized. We have higher levels of well-being and fulfillment, and we are more likely to achieve our goals and deliver better performance. Unfortunately, as the short story at the beginning illustrated, our usual focus lies on our weaknesses and not on our strengths. In the workplace, for example, the usual practice is to look at your weaknesses and find ways to work on them. Just remember again, our inherent negativity bias makes us focus on the things that are wrong, and we tend to miss out on what is actually good and working. Whether we focus on strengths or on weaknesses, one point that we already mentioned before comes true again. What we focus on determines how we see the world. We can decide to look at what is not working, that will be the fault finder, or we can choose to look at what's working and try to see things as a benefit finder. Let's take a time out here and do some benefit finding with yourself. What are your strengths? A simple question, but it is one that we often find surprisingly difficult to answer. It often seems much easier to find our weaknesses. Stop the video here for a minute and just write down what you think are your strengths. In the resources, you can find some more strategies to discover your strengths. You have various options, and there are 3 major frameworks out there that help you discover them more systematically. For now, here in the video, we will focus on character strengths. We do this because it's the only framework that's freely available, and you can take it without any problems, and it's completely free. Psychiatrists and clinical psychologists share a common Bible. It is called the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Illnesses. It's a great big book that provides a vocabulary for everybody who's working on mental illnesses. It provides a classification of all the things that can go wrong with people. All the symptoms of schizophrenia, personality disorders, or psychopaths are all described in detail and allows everybody who's working with them professionally to measure what is wrong with a person. But nothing similar to that existed for the positive side of human beings. That is why Chris Peterson and Marty Seligman, 2 of the founding fathers of positive psychology, have come up with what they called Inventory of Strengths. It is the best known strengths framework in positive psychology and tries to compile the wisdom of thousands of years of spiritual and philosophical traditions. The 2 psychologists went out and studied all the classic wisdom texts, philosophers and religious traditions like the Bible, the Bushido Samurai Code, the Bhagavad Gita, and so on and so on. The result was a framework made up of 24 universal character strengths, such as love, courage, and humility. Let's take a closer look. What they learned was that they all shared 6 common virtues: wisdom, courage, love or humanity, temperance, justice, and spirituality or transcendence. What they said is that if we want to be happy, we have to figure out how to put these 6 virtues into actions. And the way we put them into action is by applying our character strengths. the virtue of wisdom can be achieved through these 5 character strengths: love of learning, perspective, curiosity, open-mindedness, and creativity. In order to find out what your character strengths are, you can take the basic online assessment for free and find out more about your top strengths, which are also called your signature strengths. These are those strengths that are most core to who we are as human beings. They are very easy and natural to us to express, and also our friends and family will be able to see them in us. A quick side note here: if you want to take a look at another strengths framework, check out the Realize 2 or the Strengths Finder 2.0. Those 2 frameworks are different. They are different in how they approach our strengths, and they are also different in how they see strengths. But they can be definitely very helpful too. There are links and related exercises in the resources. Once you've completed the VIA survey, and maybe done some of the exercises you find in the additional resources, you will have a clearer picture of your strengths. Maybe it will also be easier for you to spot them in others. But knowing your strengths is only one part of the story. It only gets really exciting when you start applying them more often. Because in the end, strengths are only strengths when they can be effectively applied. A strength without application in the right situation is nothing more than untapped potential. So when it comes to how can we apply our strengths, this is very specific to you individually. Even though I added resources with lots of suggestions, if you want to get most out of your strengths, you have to be creative. So after you identified your top strengths, choose one of them, and for the following week, use the strength in a new way every day. Again, be creative about it. This exercise, if done regularly, has been shown to have a long-term positive effect on your well-being. And the beauty of applying our strengths is that they not only affect our happiness, but also our success. Still, there are a few things to keep in mind. First, apply them. That's easy. Practical wisdom can only be reached through practice. There's no substitute for exercising our strengths in the right way and understanding why. More controversial is that our strengths are not fixed from birth. They can be developed. Remember here to keep a growth mindset. And thirdly, working on our weaknesses is not irrelevant. Do not forget about them. I'm not advocating ignoring your weaknesses completely. It is just that we have to shift more focus towards strengths, because that's where our biggest potential lies. And here we already are at the roundup of this lecture. Strengths enable us to be at our best. We need more focus on what we are good at. In this class, we'll deal with one of the most important factors for our happiness: relationships. We will soon see how relationships are important to us and why they are so important to us. And then we'll see how we can transform our relationships to make them more happy and more fulfilled. In particular, we will first look at what not to do. 4 behaviors that can, with up to 94% accuracy, predict divorce. But after that, we will turn to the happiest couples and look at what they do differently and learn how we can nurture happy and fulfilled relationships. We will start off this section by taking a closer look at another research study, the Harvard Man Study. This is not just any study, but it's one of the longest running and most ambitious psychological studies of all time. The Harvard Man Study ran over 75 years and followed young men from Harvard University and the city of Boston throughout their whole lives. Altogether, more than 700 men participated. It started shortly after they entered college in the 1930s and ended just a few years ago. The goal was to identify the life circumstances and personal characteristics that distinguish the happiest, most fulfilled man from the least happy and least successful ones. In his conclusion, after almost 3/4 of a century of research, George Wayland, the principal investigator, concluded with these words. He said, "We have 70 years of evidence that our relationships with other people matter, and matter more than anything else in the world." And he's not the only one to say this. Another study, very aptly called Very Happy People, by two of the leading researchers in the field, looked at more than 200 people and wanted to find out what do the top 10% in terms of happiness do differently than the rest and the least happy people. When they compared them, they found that the happiest respondents did not exercise significantly more. They did not participate in religious activities significantly more, or experience more objectively defined good events, like getting a promotion or something like this. It turned out that there was only one factor that distinguished the happiest 10% from the rest. The only factor that was consistently different was that the happiest 10% had very good social relationships. Having good social relationships was not sufficient for being happy, but it was necessary. So there is only one thing that it seems impossible to miss out on if you want to be very happy. We need to have fulfilling relationships to be very happy and to thrive. These two studies that I just told you about provide very strong support, but they're not the only studies. There are hundreds of more that show how social relationships are linked to longevity, lower stress, improved overall well-being, and so on and so on. But to find out why relationships are so crucial for our well-being, we have to turn to evolutionary psychology. Because we human beings have an innate need to form social bonds and connect with other people. It is literally wired into our biology, because when we make a positive social connection, our body releases a chemical called oxytocin. That's a hormone and a neurotransmitter that induces pleasure and reduces our stress. That means that each positive social connection that we engage in throughout our day bolsters our immune system. We literally get more resilient, more resistant, physically, but also psychologically, towards stresses, towards adversities that we have to face throughout our day. And these research findings are true for relationships in general, for our friends and family, for our romantic partners, just as much as for colleagues at work, or people in our community that we interact with. Throughout the rest of this class, we will engage specifically with marriages and romantic relationships. But nevertheless, most things that I'm gonna tell you are also true for relationships with friends and other family members. It is the same underlying principles that govern our romantic relationships that make also our normal, not romantic relationships more fulfilling and more fulfilled. So let's start off with how not to do it. John and Julie Gottman, two acclaimed love scientists, identified the so-called 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. These are 4 kinds of behaviors that allow them to predict with up to 94% accuracy if a couple is heading for divorce, just by observing them in their laboratory. So they bring in 2 couples, have them talk about certain kind of topics that are relevant for the relationships, and just by the behavior the couple exhibits to each other, they can say with up to 94% accuracy if they are going to divorce within the next 5 years. That is incredible. And these 4 types of behavior is what they called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. and we're going to take a look at them more closely. The first of the four horsemen of the apocalypse is criticism. In the worst relationships, partners really often point with fingers at each other and are very critical. There's an attitude that is kind of diagnosing their partner's defects, personality defects. When they complain, they use words such as always or never. Like, you never listen to me, or how could you forget this? You're such an ignorant person. So criticism is not framed in the behavior of the other person. It's targeted to the personality of the other person. The best predictor for a divorce is a behavior they call contempt. That's the second of the horsemen of the apocalypse. Contempt, that's when partners have an attitude of superiority towards one another. For example, you think you're more intelligent than your partner, or you're more punctual than your partner. And these attitudes often express as hostility, mockery, and disgust. This is the worst of the four horsemen, and almost certainly leads to divorce or breakup. The third horseman of the apocalypse is called stonewalling. That's a term John and Julie Gottman used for people who are withdrawing from conflict. Withdrawing from conflict up to an extent where it's not clear anymore if they're actually even listening. So a stonewaller is really tuned out of a conversation. The fourth and last one of the four horsemen is defensiveness. People become defensive and say, it's not my fault, it's yours, and start a counterattack. Or they present themselves as an innocent victim. The best and most fulfilled relationships, however, do exactly the opposite. They are open to criticism and take it as interesting feedback, what their partner tells about them, or tells to them. So these four horsemen are the most detrimental behaviors for a relationship. But there are other things as well. John Gottman studied marriages for decades now, and he, for example, also observed that about 70% of the conflicts that married couples face are perpetual conflicts that can never be resolved. So how do they know that? They studied a set of marriages over a 4-year period, coded the conflicts, every single word that they heard. And to their surprise, only 30% of the problems were specific to a given situation. The rest were associated with basic differences in personality, or differences that are closely tied to each partner's concept of who they are and what they think of themselves as a person. But guess what? Getting a different partner doesn't free you from perpetual conflict. You just trade in one set and get back another. There is a serious misconception when it comes to relationships, especially among young people, that see romantic relationships as a matter of finding the right person, the one perfect man or woman with whom we will be happily forever. But this is a flawed idea. It's just as much a myth of happiness as the one we talked about in the beginning. Relationship researchers have consistently proven that the most important part of being happily together is the process of being together and not the finding of the right partner. This is not to say that we can be with any person in the world. That would be neither true. But at the same time, it's not about finding this one right person. It's about making it work. It's about the process. So this process is what positive psychology is taking a closer look at. It wants to understand the process of being together happily. Remember, at the beginning of this whole course, when we looked at what positive psychology actually is, what kind of question it is asking? Let's go back there for a second. We said that the difference of positive psychology to the traditional psychological approach is that it operates on a health model rather than the disease model. That means it looks at strengths, competencies, and pursuing happiness. And this is also something that we have to do when we look at relationships. John Gottman said,
At first, when I figured out how to predict divorce, I thought I had found the key to saving marriages. But like so many experts before me, I was wrong. I was not able to crack the code to saving marriages until I started to analyze what went right in happy marriages. Positive psychology's question is, what makes some relationships thrive and grow stronger over time? This is the questions we're going to ask now. We are going to tackle this question by using the mining model of relationship development. A researcher called Harvey developed it and identified 5 specific components of successful, fulfilling relationships. Couples looking to improve their relationships may look at this model as a bit of a guide on how to understand what a truly healthy relationship can look like. It is important to note that no one can do this perfectly, and most couples have issues in some dimensions. So take this as an ideal model and try to learn from it, because one of the reasons why positive psychology exists is because we want to learn from the best. The 5 dimensions in the mining model of relationships are knowing and being known, benefit finding with the other partner, as we talked in the beginning, accepting, equality of the partners, and finally, understanding the relationship as a journey. So let's together look at these in turn.
In this lecture, we will deal with the so-called dark side of our lives. We'll start by establishing an understanding that we actually do need negative emotions. We do need anger, sadness, and frustration sometimes. But then we will move on and explore how our negative emotions, our negative feelings, all too often are not productive and not helpful. And in these instances, we will have 2 broad strategies to deal with it. Those are called problem-focused and the other one emotion-focused coping strategies. First, we'll look at the problem-focused coping strategies. And these are things like dealing with the problem right away, or seeking out social support, doing exercise, or engaging in something that is called expressive writing to overcome tough times. The second broad strategy is emotion-focused coping. For this, we will look at the story of Viktor Frankl, a psychologist who survived the concentration camps, and then go on and revisit optimism and optimistic mindsets. In this lecture, after we talked so much about how to be happy and positive emotions and why it's good to feel happy, we also have to acknowledge another thing, and that is life is not always funny or nice. And the goal of this course is certainly not to make you happy all the time. Positive psychology is a science, and so it would be unprofessional and plain wrong to claim that it's about constant happiness. What's important to understand is that everyone experiences negative emotions. Emotions like anger, frustration, and sadness. It's part of being human. In fact, Tal Ben-Shahar gives the example that there are only 2 kinds of people who do not experience negative emotions. The first group of those are psychopaths. By definition, they do not experience emotions like shame or embarrassing, so they, up to a certain extent, do not experience negative emotions. And the second group of people who do not experience negative emotions are dead. So if you look at this from this perspective, it's good if you experience negative emotions, because it means that you're still alive and that you're not a psychopath. And that is the reason why we as humans should always give ourselves the permission to experience these emotions. It's natural, it's normal, because everybody does experience these negative emotions once in a while. It only really starts to become a problem when our negative mood is not anymore temporary, but chronic. This is what psychologists call major depressive disorder, what we would normally call depression. But in normal doses, negative feelings can in fact be good. Here's what Joseph Forgas, an Australian psychologist, has to say about it. He says that bad moods are seen in our happiness-focused culture as representing a problem. But we need to be aware that temporary, mild negative feelings have important benefits. And then he continues to say, it's shallow and untrue to assume that positive feelings can only have positive consequences, and that negative feelings can only have negative consequences. Both positive and negative emotions have evolutionary benefits. And our negative emotions have a function. They have a part in our normal human life and are also a potential for growth. Sometimes it's important to feel sad or angry. One example would be if something bad happens to us. Let's say we or someone we love gets very ill. In these instances, it's absolutely logical that we feel sad. Or if we have a breakup with a partner, it's absolutely logical to feel sad. It makes sense. Similarly, anger can be an adequate and valuable response if somebody treats us in an unfair manner. Anger is a legitimate reaction to something that is perceived as unjust or unfair. The bottom line of all of this is that it's important that we give ourselves the permission to experience also negative emotions, that we accept those as part of normal human life. Often we encounter difficulties and situations in our lives that we need to overcome. We have problems to solve. Maybe we got laid off and need to look for a new job, or went through a breakup recently. If we face one of these tough situations, our first choice is to deal with the problem. Throughout this video, we'll discuss so-called problem-focused coping strategies. In simple words, that means strategies to solve these problems and deal with them constructively. The first one that we're going to look at is dealing with it. How can we set goals to deal with problems? The second one is turning to others, to friends and family. Thirdly, we talk about how exercise can be such an important tool. And fourthly and lastly, we talk about expressive writing. Let's look at those in turn. The first one is the most obvious one, to deal with the problem and to find a solution. Finding a solution is a process that is very individual, very specific to your needs and your specific problem. That's why in the resources you will find an action plan for effective problem solving. This one leads you through the most important step when it comes to problem solving. It's based on a therapeutic approach called problem-solving therapy and was proven to be a very helpful framework to deal with all kinds of problems. Whether it's a job search or overcoming a breakup, to making a difficult life decision or handling conflict with a coworker. These few steps you can use as a framework to try to solve all kinds of problems that you encounter throughout your life. The second one may also be quite obvious now, after we talked about the incredible importance of relationships in our lives. But still, I had to mention it here, because so many of us, and that includes me, have the tendency to turn inward when we face stress and pressure and tough times. The rituals that we build up with friends, for example meeting every Friday after work, are the first ones we let go when our pressure mounts. But this is a flawed strategy. In fact, a bunch of studies show the importance of social support for our resilience and resistance in face of problems. One study, for example, looked at people who had a heart attack, and they found that those people who received emotional support from others during the next 6 months after their heart attack were 3 times more likely to survive. This means that friends and family can literally save our lives just by being there. Similarly, another study showed that participating in a breast cancer support group actually doubled the woman's life expectancy after the surgeries. What this shows us is that our friends and family have the power to save our lives simply by being there and supporting us, by being somebody to turn to. What I'm advocating is here to make use of these incredible support, to turn towards your friends and to build relationships that you can turn to in tough times as well. We often hear about the physical benefits of exercise. Those are quite commonly known, such as reducing the risks of heart attack, stroke, diabetes, high blood pressure, certain cancers, and in general, increasing our immune system functioning. But there are also psychological benefits that are not as well known. Among them is that we get less anxious if we engage in physical activity regularly. And we are also less prone to stress, and our self-esteem is increased. Last but not least, it also makes us feel good. And this is especially true for people with depression or people facing tough times. An amazing study done brought in a bunch of depressed people with depressive symptoms. And they split them up into 3 different groups. One of the groups, they gave antidepressants. The other group, they gave antidepressants and ordered them to exercise 30 minutes for 3 times a week. And the third group, they only instructed them to exercise 30 minutes for 3 times a week. And what they found was that after 3 months, all of those groups showed similar decreases in depressive symptoms. That means that the researchers showed that exercise alone was as effective as the state-of-the-art antidepressants on the market. But that's not even all. There's more, because after these 3 months, they stopped. They stopped giving them antidepressants, they stopped the study, and waited for another 3 months. So after another 3 months of not doing anything with the patients, with the depressed people, they again looked at how are they doing now? Are they doing worse than before? How many people relapsed back into depression? And what was most amazing, that in the antidepressants groups, the relapse rates were about 40%. And in the exercise-only group, not even 10% of the people relapsed back into depression. That, in essence, means that physical activity is as powerful at reducing depression as antidepressants, the best antidepressants on the market, and its long-term effects are way better. That is amazing, and that's why physical activity is such a powerful tool for people who are feeling sad a lot, who are depressed, who have a shallow mood. There is even much more to know about this topic and physical exercise in general. And it's a very undermastered area in psychology in general. But this would go beyond the scope of this course. Just rest assured that physical activity can be very powerful, not only for our physical, but also for our psychological well-being. The 4th strategy is called coping through writing, or expressive writing. With this exercise, you have to be a little careful, because it asks you to write about a very upsetting or traumatic experience. Nevertheless, it has been found to be an exercise that has greatly benefited many people. The instructions are to write for 15 minutes for 4 days. It has been researched quite extensively, and you will have clear instructions in the additional resources. The results of this exercise are quite remarkable. In the days after the study, that means after the 4 days of writing about these traumatic experiences, those people who wrote about it are less anxious, become more social, their well-being or happiness increases, and what's most remarkable, their physical health improves. Simply by writing about emotionally upsetting experiences, our immune system improves. So try it out and see how it's working for you. In this video class, we will take a look at the third way to cope when bad things happen to us. This category is called emotion-focused coping, and I want to start this section by telling the story of this man. His name is Viktor Frankl. He's a powerful example for our capacity to choose our response to what happens to us. Viktor Frankl was a psychotherapist who specialized in treating depression, especially for those prone to suicide. But he was also Jewish and lived in Nazi Germany. So in September of 1942, as a young doctor, he and his new bride, his mother, father and brother, were arrested in Vienna. They were all taken to concentration camps. He was reduced to nothing but his naked existence. As he entered the camp, they took the last of his belongings, including his clothes, his wedding ring, and the manuscript of a book that he was writing. Then every inch of his body was shaved, and he was escorted into a shower room. The only consolation that he had was that real water dripped from the shower, instead of gas. In these camps, his whole family and everybody he loved died. He was the only one who survived. And when he came out of the concentration camp, after more than 3 years of the most inhuman treatment that you can imagine, he shared one of the most important insights he had. He said that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. In the concentration camps, Viktor Frankl began to understand that in every situation, no matter how helpless we are and how terrible the situation is, we humans are able to change our attitudes towards what's happening to us. This is something that nobody can take away from us, and that's why Frankl called it the last of human freedoms. And with this insight, I want to go back to a topic that we already looked at earlier in this course. We are revisiting optimism and pessimism. Back when we talked about optimism, we looked at it in terms of us expecting positive things to happen. We looked at self-fulfilling prophecies. And we saw the advantages that optimists enjoy and how it is better for us to be optimistic in many situations. And now we turn again to the optimism-pessimism dichotomy, but from a different perspective. Because optimists also react differently when negative events happen to them. Fortunately, we hardly ever face circumstances like Viktor Frankl did. But we do have an inherent negativity bias that makes us focus more on the bad things that happen to us and blow the negative events out of proportion. Very often, we nowadays make our own misery. We focus too much on the negative and what's not working. The lesson to be learned is that we can choose our response. No matter what happens to us, we are always capable to control our attitude towards it. For the rest of this video class, we will first learn about the different attitudes that we can bring to negative events, that is, optimism, pessimism, and then secondly, we will learn how we can better control it and how we can rewire our brain. Let's start off by turning at the first point, the optimists and the pessimists. The defining characteristics of a pessimist is that they tend to believe that bad events will last a long time, will undermine everything they do, and are their own fault. These characteristics are called the 3 Ps that make the difference between an optimist and a pessimist view. Let's assume something bad happens to us. Pessimists interpret negative events firstly as permanent. That's the first P. Pessimists think that it's probably going to be permanent, meaning that it will happen again and again in the future. The second P is that a negative event is seen to be pervasive, meaning that it is not just this one event, but just one more piece of evidence of a pervasive trend. For example, you locked your car keys in the car and think, that's typically me, I'm just a chaotic, mindless person. The third P is personal. That means that pessimists look at negative events as something that has to do with them. A salesperson, for example, gets rejected and assumes that they are not good at sales. This is a pessimistic way to look at it. Optimists would think that it's a product that's hard to sell, or maybe that the economy is bad, or something like this, something outside their personal influence. The same thing goes the other way around. With a positive event, they do the opposite. Comparing to the pessimists, the optimists are confronted with the same hard knocks of this world, but they think about misfortune in the opposite way. They tend to believe that defeat is just a temporary setback, that its causes are confined to this one case. The optimists believe that defeat is not their own fault. They look at circumstances, bad luck, or think that other people brought it about. Such people are not affected by defeat. Confronted by a bad situation, they perceive it as a challenge and they try harder. These two habits of thinking about causes have consequences. Literally hundreds of studies show that pessimists give up more easily and get depressed more often. These experiments also show that optimists do much better in school and in college, at work and on the playing field. They regularly even exceed the predictions of the aptitude tests. When optimists run for office, they are more apt to be elected than pessimists are. And their health is unusually good. They age well, they are much freer than most of us from the usual physical ills of middle age, and the Nun study suggests that optimists even live longer. For people who are more pessimists, all this is bad news. But the good news is that optimism can be learned. Even optimists can benefit from learning how to change, because almost all optimists have periods of at least mild pessimism, so it can help us anyway. In the resources, you can find a link to a test if you are more optimist or more pessimist. Usually, we are not simply one or the other. For most of us, it depends on the situation we are in. We tend to act differently in different areas of our lives, and that holds also true when it comes to optimism. In order to understand how we can learn to interpret events more optimistically, we will look at the so-called ABC model. The psychologist Albert Ellis created the ABC model to help us understand and control our reactions to adversity. ABC stands for adversity, belief, and consequence. Here is how it works. Ellis observed that rather than the adversity itself, it is our belief about the cause of adversity that actually triggers our feeling response and our behavior. That is, adversity leads to belief, which leads to consequences. It is not what happens to us that causes our reactions. Rather, it is what we think about what happens to us that determines our response. Let's look at an example. We face an adversity. Let's say someone shouts at us. Then you form a belief about this event. This person must be angry at me. This person doesn't like me, or this person wants to harm me somehow. And then, as a result of this belief, we react in a certain way. In this example, we might feel afraid. But as we saw with Viktor Frankl, we are not slaves. It can be learned. Frankl says that between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. this last of human freedoms that Frankl talked about. We might not have the control of an adversity, but we always have the control over our beliefs. In order to understand the ABC better and how we can change it, let's take a closer look at two ABC chains and how we can react differently to the same situation. Here, the situation is my partner or my child or like a good friend of us, whoever, hasn't returned my phone calls. This is the adversity. As a result, I form a certain belief about it. In this case, I think something terrible must have happened. And the consequence is that I'm worried all day, that I'm feeling anxious, something might have happened because they're not returning my phone calls. Here another ABC chain with the same adversity. The adversity stays the same, my partner or child hasn't returned my phone calls. But then I think she must be very busy today. And as a result of this thought, this belief, I don't feel bad about it and I go about my day. You see the difference? It's the same adversity. It's just our belief that is very different and our belief that triggers the different consequences, the different responses. One more example. You've been on a diet, a strict diet for more than 3 weeks, and now you cannot resist eating a delicious piece of cake. The way you think about it is, I was able to stick to my diet for more than 3 weeks now. Maybe I did deserve this piece of cake, but now it's time for me to focus again on my diet. The consequence is that you don't feel bad about it and continue your diet as strictly as before. Another way to look at it is you have been, again, on a strict diet for more than 3 weeks, and now you cannot resist eating a delicious piece of cake. But your thoughts here are, oh, I'm so weak. My whole diet is blown now. I'm terrible. I don't have any willpower at all. And the consequence is, I feel terrible. You decide to eat another piece of cake, and because it doesn't matter anymore, because you're weak, your diet is blown anyway. To wrap it up one more time. When we encounter adversity, we react by thinking about it. Our thoughts very quickly become beliefs, and these beliefs may become so habitual that we don't even realize we have them. And those beliefs then have consequences. They are the direct causes of what we feel and what we do about it. For this, you can find a writing exercise in the resources. And you can also find an ABC reflection sheet that looks something like this. Use it to record 6 ABC sequences from your life over the next few days. You will find clear instructions, as always, in the additional materials. Once you have identified a few ABC sequences, we are then able to start changing our beliefs. And there are 2 options to deal with these beliefs: distraction and disputation. The first option is distraction. Try distracting yourself when you start creating negative beliefs. There are several ways for us to do this. A famous, quite effective strategy is to stand up and shout, "Stop." This might be weird if you're among other people, but it has been shown to be very effective. One, a little bit more quiet option, is having a small card in your pocket that says "Stop" on it, and you just pull it out and look at it. And yet another option is wearing a rubber band around your wrist and snapping it hard to make your thoughts stop. This last version has also been shown to be very effective because it combines it with a physical stimulus. Once you stop ruminating then, you need to shift your attention somewhere else. Focus intently on something else for around a minute or 2 maybe. This can be a song maybe that's coming to your head, or anything else basically that's not your negative belief in the first place. My favorite option is to write those troubling thoughts down in the moment they come to my mind. Then set a time every day, let's say 9 p.m. for 10 minutes to think about what you wrote during this day. This strategy will enable you to let go of the negative thoughts in the very moment, because after all, you will be able to revisit them later anyway. The second option then is disputation. Disputing negative thought patterns is more effective in the long run because it prevents negative thoughts to come back. The way you do this is by asking yourself, well, what are the facts? What is the evidence for my belief? And if there is true evidence for it, then you can ask yourself, what alternative ways are there to look at it? And even if your beliefs are correct, you can ask yourself, what does this imply? And then the last stage is that even if this belief is true now, does this thinking about it now serve me well? If no, use the distraction method. And if yes, how can you go about changing it? What neuroscientists tell us that the more frequently optimistic thoughts are rehearsed, the more natural they become. With practice, reframing, and consciously generating optimistic thoughts, optimism can become an automatic response. Let me now round up this whole lecture on dealing with negative events, with negative situations and feelings. Finding true happiness is not about feeling good all the time. It's quite the contrary. Being sad, angry, and fearful might be appropriate sometimes. Remember that we can face adversity in 3 different ways. Firstly, we can accept the situation and the way we're feeling about it. Then we can change our behavior. And thirdly, we can change our beliefs. Welcome to the last lecture of the course. You almost made it. This is just a summary of the most important points that we discussed throughout this lecture. I picked 5 which are meant to exemplify what is the essence of this course. The first one is focus on what works, because what we focus on determines our reality, and it determines the way we are and the way we behave and the way we think. The second one is that happiness actually leads to success, and not only the other way around. It's not only when I'm successful, then I will be happy, but also when I'm happy, then I will be more successful. The third point is about embracing the moment. That's about mindfulness. Because this very moment is the only moment that we are alive in. So let's embrace it. The fourth point is that our relationships are crucial. They matter, and they matter probably more than anything else in the world. And last but not least, the fifth point is, it's all in our action. It's what we do. We've seen this over and over again. If you just look at self-esteem, for example, or mindsets, it's about what we do that determines who we become. Thank you for going through this course. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope that you learned something and that you will be able to take away something to make really positive, long-lasting changes in your lives. Again, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Again, here you see the main summary points that we just discussed. And now I want to finish by drawing our attention to 2 highly important facts about our life. The first one is that we are all connected very much to the people around us. Caring about our own happiness is not enough. We are not disconnected from the rest of the world. Our behaviors affect others, and we are affected by others' behavior. This is a subtle and mostly unconscious process, but what we usually do not realize is that our attitudes and behaviors not only affect those very close to us, but also those further away. In fact, up to third-degree contacts are affected by our behavior. That means that if I gain weight, one of my friend's friend will gain weight. Similarly, if your friends stop smoking, you may stop smoking because of that. And that if your friend's friend becomes happier, you also become happier. This is not an empty assertion, but a sheer fact. Nicholas Christakis, a network scientist from Yale University, put it like this. If we are connected to everyone else by 6 degrees, and we can influence them up to 3 degrees, then one way to think about ourselves is that each of us can reach about halfway to everybody else on the planet. And this is one of the reasons what makes these lessons so powerful. One of the reasons why our own behavior matters so much, and why if we take responsibility for our own well-being, we also take responsibility for the well-being of others. And the second point is also the most important point of the whole class. Take action. Because without it, it's all for nothing. After all, knowing the words is not the same thing as living the meaning. Suppose I memorize the printed instructions on a first aid kit. Does that mean I can give first aid? No. The full meaning comes when I admit I know nothing and then try, practice, and succeed. And that is why I encourage you now to take one last time out with me. Ask yourself, which of the exercises that I learned about throughout this course am I most likely to sustain on a regular basis? What appealed most to you? Okay, I hope that there are some exercises or themes that you do make a regular habit. So now there's only one thing left. Let me finish with a quote that William changed. And he says, "To change your life, start immediately, do it flamboyantly, and no exceptions." Thank you.